Gents, if you can stay for a few minutes, Mark's going to share with us how he lives out his faith with the special ministry he's going to describe. If you have to leave, that's fine too, but I'll stay here. And I'll put the Bibles away, so don't worry about that. And Mark, it's great to have you here with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be here. I came here actually for church a few months ago, and I thought it was wonderful. I'm part of a church in Southbury that I'm very involved in, but I loved coming here, and it made a big impression on my daughter too, who is not. My daughter's 4, and our church, the youth program is a little different, and my daughter's kind of shy, so. When the kids were called down, I said, well, there's no way my daughter's going downstairs for Sunday school. And somebody actually came up and it might have been your wife, and said, why don't you come downstairs? So she immediately took her hand and went downstairs, and she asked me that when we're going back. So we'll be back to visit. So, but I want to thank you. I want to thank the church as a whole, because your church is involved in my ministry. I'm from Good Samaritan Mission, which is a ministry partner of Jericho Partnership. For those of you that are familiar with Jericho Partnership, which is a ministry mobilizing organization in Danbury. And we are Good Samaritan Mission is what's called the Gospel Rescue Mission. So we're similar to about 300 similar ministries around the United States, Bridgeport Rescue Mission being one, if you're familiar with them. But the one thing that kind of binds us together is we're working, regardless of where the ministry is, whether it's in Cleveland, whether it's in LA, whether it's in Danbury, we're working with the homeless, we're working with people that are marginalized, and we're working with people that need the Lord. And thankfully, a lot of them know that when they come to us. So we have 3 main things that we do. We have a shelter that operates each weekday, and then every night of the year. The nighttime part is for men. We work with 14, we shelter 14 men every night, although this time of year we usually are doing more like 17 or 18 because it's so cold we don't want to turn people away if they come, because in Danbury there's really not enough shelter space for all the people that are homeless. So we'll make exceptions if people just need to, if we don't have any beds left, cots left, we'll find blankets and put them on the floor, which is obviously better than being outside. The way we operate our shelter, though, is most of the men that are staying there are actually working with us to get out of homelessness. So what we'll do is we'll offer them an extended stay, like 30 days at a time. And if they do that, the payoff is they're working with us every week on a plan to get themselves out of homelessness. And usually what that means is if we're not finding a place, we're finding somebody in Danbury that that's what they do. It would be to help find them a place to live. Or for some of them, they would come to the second major part of our ministry, which is a transitional rehab and housing program called Discipleship House, which is roughly 6 to 12 month ministry where when men come in, we work on them to stay sober, to break the chain of their addiction, to get out of homelessness, to be discipled. They're going through church, they're going through Bible classes, they're doing studies, they're doing life skills for practical things, and then after a period of time we help them get work, help them find a place to live, help them get connected to a church, help them find a mentor, and then we can set them out in the community with the supports that they need in the community. The third part of our ministry is a women's ministry where we're mostly doing case management work for a lot of the homeless women in Danbury. A lot of them, unfortunately, are caught up in a lot of things like prostitution, and that has kind of complicated their situation and kept them in a cycle of being addicted to drugs and homeless. The women, we don't work with as many, but we work with them a lot more intensely because it seems like the trappings are worse a lot of times for the homeless women in our area than for the men. So those are the main things we do. I want to thank your church again, because your church Matter of fact, last week there were a few people that came from the church to come and serve dinner to our guys. Our shelter opens for the night at 8 o'clock. Dorothy Day Soup Kitchen down there serves like mid to late afternoon. So even by the time most of the guys get to the shelters at night, they're already hungry. And the last thing they're expecting actually is for a door to open and somebody have a meal for them. It's like Christmas. So I want to thank you folks for that. But your church also a couple times a year will come and do a project at our shelter. Your church has been doing that actually before we ran the shelter. Jericho Partnership ran that shelter. It was a seasonal shelter that was just open in the winter. When we started up, they gave the shelter over to us to be year-round. So your church actually predates us in working with that shelter, so I want to thank you for that. And the other reason is I just want to ask that you prayerfully consider volunteering with us. Anybody who's worked with homeless ministry knows that there's no way homeless ministry works without volunteers because there's not enough of us. We had 500 people come through our doors in a 12-month period last year. There's no way the few of us that are there are going to be able to help them. So we're always looking for people that would be willing to stay overnight and keep an eye on the place a couple times a year, or serve as mentors to our Discipleship House residents. That's a commitment where we ask for about an hour a week for a few months. It's not a ton of time. It's a huge impact, though, for our guys because a lot of what they're looking for is how can I get back to the community? And they're scared because they're scared that they're going to leave us and they're going to get back and they're just going to find their old patterns again, and the people that they maybe need to avoid and know they need to avoid are going to find them again, and they're not going to have that support going back of knowing somebody who's a Christ follower who can help them stay accountable and also help them to avoid the trappings that they faced before they got to us in the first place. So I have brochures if anybody would like one. I'll come talk to me or I'll just leave some here as well. We've been in operation for about 1.5 years, so we're relatively new at what we do. We've been blessed in the last year. We've seen some really nice success stories. One was a guy who just happened to wander in from a program that he was at a secular program, and they kind of discouraged him from reading the Bible. He had come from Delaware to go to New York to do that, and then realized he made a mistake and didn't know where to go, so he got a bus ticket to Danbury. And while he was walking around the streets in Danbury, he walked in. This is like our belief that God makes an impact on people, because 2 guys talked him into coming. One of them was a guy we had banned from our shelter for misbehavior, who said, "You got to go to that shelter, they're really good." And another one was a guy who we didn't take into Discipleship House because we didn't feel like he would be a good fit. And he even told the guy, "Look, I can't get in that program, but if you can get in that program, you definitely should." So he walked down to us, and he was there for 6 months. He left. He never had a career, the guy. He went from being a promising basketball player to a drug addict, and now in his 30s is finally figuring out what he wants to do with his life, and he's working in a career. He's now volunteering with Athletes for Christ and teaching kids basketball skills. He has his own place to live in. It's funny, he came in as this guy with just a t-shirt, and he looked sickly, and the last time I saw him, he's on his phone. He's dressed well, he's dressed nice, he's gained weight, he's healthy, he's volunteering, helping people, and turning around his faith to help other people. So if you're interested, please take one. Even if you're not interested, but you'd still like to come and see what we do, give us a call, because I always like when people get a chance to come down and see what we do. So, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I was one of the people that went there last week. We took the meal, and we stayed overnight. And if any of you are thinking about that at all, talk to me, because it was, first of all, it's very easy. It's not a big deal at all. We were surprised at how much people appreciated us. Mm-hmm. And one of the things you mentioned, how people are on the way to getting themselves back out in the public.
Mm-hmm.
We even had a guy that, you lock up, I think it's 10 o'clock,
Mhm.
but he came late because he was working at a restaurant, and he's got a job, and he's getting his life back in order, so, we knew when to expect that knock on the door, and he came in. And we prayed, we had a meal, and then we prayed after that, and I think we had 14 people there that night. We were full. But I'm going to say half of the guys in the room, if not more than that, came over and prayed with us and were really involved in it. So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
just not, cots and stuff.
Right, thank you.
And we had also, I think, Lou, you may have been there with us one time, and we cleaned that up. And then we were over at Disciple House, where they got classrooms, and they're really helping these people get, learn life skills and get their feet back on the ground. So you're doing great work.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Well, as I said, we always need hands. And the other reason why it's good to have volunteers come in is because the guys, we're there all the time, so after a while, they may tune us out a little bit. Not intentionally, but when you're homeless especially, and I've worked in all different like social services. What I've learned about the homeless is I think homeless people appreciate volunteers more than anybody I've worked with, whether they're kids, whether they're families, because these guys don't think that anybody cares about them. So when anybody who doesn't have to be there shows up to do anything on behalf, I can tell you. I know obviously some of the guys at our shelter, they're not all choir boys, so the fact that they come in and they are behaving, they're very appreciative of what they've got. And anytime anyone is willing to even come in and just pray, because we have quite a few people who come in once a year. That's fine. But when they see that, even when you're not talking to them, it's a huge testimony because they know that there's something different about someone who's willing to come in one night and be there with them when they don't have to. We have to. We work there. When somebody is willing to do that, that doesn't have to, that is a big testimony. People, we've heard that. We've heard that from people. So.
And I would add one more thing. I was at a meeting last year up in New Milford where they were talking about homelessness. And you tend to think of homeless as just being kind of deadbeats and people that have no skills and they're out there because they should be. But we heard from people that had owned a house and some stocks went bad and whatever business they were in were bad. And they lost their jobs and they were living in a van for a while and then they ended up in the homeless shelter. So they were really desperate, but it's not all their fault. So. And they appreciate any help they can get.
Thanks for sharing.
Oh, thank you for your time.
Delighted to be in partnership with you.